welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the U.S. and its allies of raising tensions on the Korean peninsula. Earlier, the foreign ministers of South Korea and China met in Beijing and pledged to improve bilateral relations. Today, we discuss the regional dynamics in East Asia and what it means for South Korea.
Позицию ведущего внешнеторгового партнера России. А наша страна по итогам прошлого года вышла на 4-е.
북한의 이런 공격용 무기 수출이라고 하는 것은 대북 제재 결의에도 명백히 위반되는 것이기 때문에 유엔과 국제사회를 통해서 필요한 대응을
In the studio with me, Ms. Mary Beth Long, a distinguished fellow at the Wilson Center. Ms. Long served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and Chairman of NATO's high-level group on nuclear issues. Ms. Long was an operations officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. Also joining us, Colonel David Maxwell, the Vice President of the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy. Colonel Maxwell was a former military planner for the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, Ms. Long, President Vladimir Putin visited China on his first overseas trip since his re-election, and his visit comes amid deepening cooperation between Russia and North Korea. Do you think Putin's visit to China will further solidify the alignment between Russia, China, and North Korea?
I think there's a lot of consternation about the visit, but it really is a broader context. Those gentlemen have a personal relationship. They like each other a lot. In the context of the everybody against the West, and when I say everybody, China, of course, Russia, Iran, North Korea, a plethora of quasi non-state actors. I think it's verification that those kinds of relationships are progressing. But I didn't really see anything that looked unusual or was detailed as to deepening and a strengthening of the relationship. I think it was a signal, but I also think it was in the context of Japan having come to the United States, the Philippines having come to the United States, a number of trilaterals in the region, or many trilaterals with the United States and others. So it was, I think, frankly, expected.
The U.S. points out that China can't have its cake and eat it too. Can China promote good relations with the Western countries, the European countries, and with the United States, as well as Russia at the same time?
I think it can, and I think they're trying to actually balance that. As you notice, no one knows better than the Koreans. At the same time that Putin was visiting, or very nearly the same time, Xi in Beijing, the Korean foreign minister and the Chinese foreign minister were preparing to meet to discuss and prepare for the trilateral coming up. I think China has stuck with its position that it's seeking a neutral stance. It's looking not to antagonize, and it's trying to play at least a semi-balanced role.
Mm-hmm. Colonel Maxwell, both China and Russia stood up for North Korea and said that they oppose what they call acts of military intimidation against North Korea by the U.S. and its allies. During the Cold War, North Korea employed the equidistant diplomacy to play China and Russia off against each other. Do you think China and Russia getting closer together, is that beneficial for North Korea or not?
Yes, I think that's a good point. Korea has a long history of playing China and Russia and former Soviet Union off against each other. I mean, going back to Mao and Stalin and the start of the Korean War. But I do think that the relationship has evolved. And I think that all three look at, and part of this is envy, they look at the alliance relationships that are in the West and how strong and powerful they are. I think they're trying to achieve that, but I think their relationships are going to be transactional at the most, and they will never have the deep ideological and trust among themselves that allies have in the West. And so, but I think that North Korea will try to exploit both Russia and China for its own ends, while still cooperating and colluding because they have common opponents, the United States and the West.
Ms. Long, both Russia and China have strained relationship with South Korea, and them now getting closer together. How does that impact South Korea's interest? And would that make South Korea more difficult to manage its respective relations with Russia and China? And will China be willing to play a constructive role in the North Korea problem?
Well, I think I agree with the Colonel. I think the relationship between China and Russia is at base one of convenience. I think it's going to ebb and flow depending on China's interests. Right now, paramount for China with its relationship with Russia is the access to favorable oil deals. And that's not going to change in the foreseeable future. When it comes to South Korea, I think that China is actually trying to show a bit of diplomacy in balancing and reassuring South Korea, both in the short term and in the long term. Does that mean that difficulties and disagreements are not going to continue to exist? Absolutely they are. And they'll bubble up as they always do. But I think China is more worried about countering this growing minilateral, multilateral charm offensive of the United States in the region, and also the very good relationship that South Korea has now developed with Japan and several of its other regional partners. I think China is on almost like a friendly offensive to try to join in on that and not have opponents at every side.
Mm-hmm. Colonel Maxwell, North Korea recently sent a scientific delegation to Moscow to attend the bilateral government meetings on trade, economy, and technology. UN Security Council Resolution 2321 prohibits any kind of science and technology cooperation with North Korea except for medical purposes. Now, are you concerned that Russia may transfer some sophisticated high-tech military technology to North Korea like ICBM or nuclear-powered submarines? Initially, people were not so much concerned, but things have changed now.
Yes, I think we should be concerned, absolutely. And I think that North Korea, of course, we know that it is providing ammunition, rockets, and although about 50% of the rockets that the Russians have shot into Ukraine have failed from North Korea, but they're providing a lot of ammunition and weaponry. And I'm sure that North Korea, in a quid pro quo, wants high technology, wants that advanced technology. And so I think they will try to seek it out. Now, will Russia restrain themselves and not provide that? I think the jury is out on that. But I think, as Ms. Long is saying, the cooperation between Russia and North Korea and Russia, China and North Korea is about undermining the alliances. And we really have to look at that. And so certainly Russia could provide that. And of course, North Korea wants to use that both for coercion against the ROC, against the United States and the alliance, but also to continue to develop advanced warfighting capabilities, which ultimately, we must never forget, that is its end desire. If it cannot cause the subversion of South Korea, ultimately it plans to use force to dominate the peninsula under its rule. And that's its long-term objective, and we should not forget that.
Ms. Long, the Biden administration sharply raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle, batteries, steel, aluminum, and metals and minerals. China immediately vowed retaliation. Do you think the heightening trade war between Washington and Beijing, how would that impact South Korea's economy and its geopolitical position?
Well, I think a lot of it's going to be the devils are in the details. In some respects, it could really help South Korea. As you pointed out, with the electric vehicles and the batteries, et cetera, the tariffs went from 25 to 100%. And what that could do is really open up a gap that South Korean vehicle manufacturers, batteries, and some other your manufacturing can basically get a wider market and basically come in behind China and expand their market share. The flip side of that could be that there'll be constraints or problems with the global supply chain because a lot of the rare earths and minerals that are processed come out of China. Also, it could mean China dumping and China flooding the region because it's not coming to the United States, and therefore giving competition, unfair competition, to South Korean manufacturers and sellers and put a strain on that relationship.
Now I want to turn to the Korea-China relationship. Ms. Long, South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol visited Beijing and met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Wang Yi said bilateral relations have faced difficulties and challenges and shows that even if there are difficulties, the momentum of cooperation should be continued while carefully managing the relationship. Both sides acknowledge that there is challenge and difficulties in the relationship, but aren't they challenge and difficulty themselves to each other?
They are, which is why I was actually very, very happy to see the results of the meeting. First of all, the meeting comes in the context of Beijing being the venue for the Xi-Putin meeting, number one. Number two, I think that this meeting has been delayed a number of times, and it may have been the very first time a Korean foreign minister was invited to Beijing.
In 6 years.
In 6 years, in 6 years. Like most of these meetings, the struggle is to get something that everybody agrees upon that they can say to the public that doesn't antagonize or set off alarm bells. And I think they did that. And the most important thing is 4 hours of conversations, is my understanding, setting up what I assume, and I think everyone can appropriately think, is going to be what are the parameters of the trilateral that are coming up in a couple of weeks. You know, what are the priorities? What are the no-go zones, and how that meeting might evolve.
So that trilat of summit between South Korea, China, and Japan, what would be considered successful in the backdrop of U.S.-China competition, in the backdrop of hardening fault lines globally?
I think, first of all, the fact that they have the meeting, I think they've been trying to do it since 2019. It was supposed to be annual. Just having the meeting, I hate to say this because it's something we always give our State Department a hard time for, but in this case, the meeting itself may be a success. The second thing, I think, expectation-wise, should be low, but to have the priorities laid out for where and in what areas the trilat participants can discuss and which ones are sort of off the table and are too difficult. And then to come out with statements in which they agree that here are the 6, the 7, the 4, whatever it is, areas in which they will seek to have dialogue. I think that's actually a pretty good result for a meeting of this kind.
Colonel Maxwell, Wang Yi also urged Korea to abide by the One China principle and handle Taiwan-related issues properly and prudently. To what extent should South Korea express concerns about Chinese assertiveness over Taiwan, and to what extent should South Korea get involved? Should there be a Taiwan contingency?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So, first and foremost, Taiwan is the core interest for China, and it wants every country to recognize one China and not to interfere with China-Taiwan relations. And so, I think we're always going to see China press for that, and I think that's very important. The second thing, and Ms. Long laid out excellent explanation, diplomatic relations and activities there. But I think that, and as I said, I think there's some envy of particularly the trilateral alliance, ROC, US, and Japan. And I think that part of this, while hopefully there'll be positive diplomatic activity, we have to be cautious because I think that China wants to try to separate and drive wedges in the alliances of the US. And so, positive results of that, could change public opinion in South Korea, in Japan, and that could have some impact on alliances. And so I think we have to be cognizant of North Korea's really political warfare strategy, which is really what it's executing. Now, South Korea is a global pivotal state as a defender of the rules-based international order and defender of democracies. I think it's got to stand up for what is right. And I think that it's got to walk that tightrope between China and the U.S. It's certainly got economic considerations, security considerations. But I think South Korea is really now a great middle power, can't back down from defending democracies. And I think we'll see South Korea make statements, diplomatic statements, recognizing one China, but also saying that the people of Taiwan have a right to self-determination. Well, they may not go that far because that'll border on independence, but they will say, that the people of Taiwan should not be threatened by China. Now, contingencies are a different story. South Korea is dependent on the lines of communication, the maritime global commons for its prosperity. And so it has interests in making sure that commerce can pass through the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and to support South Korea. Contingency, though, we have to first and foremost, if something happens in Taiwan, job one is deterring North Korea. And so it's got to focus on that deterrence. The U.S. could be split between the two. And so we've got to be concerned with the defense of both. But South Korea must first and foremost be concerned with the defense of South Korea. In addition, the forces in Korea are really optimized for the defense of South Korea, not for a fight in Taiwan. Certainly, there are advanced capabilities that South Korea has, maritime and air, but its ground forces will be used to defend from North Korea and have very little application in a Taiwan contingency.
Colonel Maxwell, the U.S. and South Korea's Special Operations Commanders will meet later this month, and South Korean military says that this is a rare meeting. What is the significance of this meeting when North Korea is heightening provocations, just shot, short-range ballistic missiles just recently? And should the South Korea establish a joint Special Operations Command similar to the U.S.?
Yeah, great questions. There is so much historical coordination of special operations forces between the U.S. and South Korea. In fact, the longest serving Special Forces Detachment, Special Forces Detachment Korea, established in 1958, is the longest serving detachment in Asia, all of Asia. And so this relationship is ongoing and really has solidified our special operations capabilities. Now, it's the fact that it's taking place and people are talking about it, I think is a signal to North Korea, because North Korea is what we call a guerrilla dynasty. It's the legitimacy of the regime is founded on anti-Japanese partisan warfare. Kim Il-sung used to say that one man in the rear is worth 10 in the front. So they have the largest special operations force in the world. And it is the largest, but the combined South Korea-U.S. Special Operations Force is far superior. And so I think it's really important to talk in North Korean terms, special operations to special operations, and we demonstrate our capabilities that really are far superior to North Korea's. Although, as Stalin or Lenin, one of those guys said, quantity has a quality all its own. They have the numbers, but South Korea and the United States have the capabilities.
And Colonel Maxwell, March 2023, the U.S. and South Korea conducted exercise teak knife infiltration and decapitation exercises. U.S. and South Korea also did joint drills recently with stealth fighter jets, including F-22 and F-35A for the South Koreans. Is U.S. and South Korea alliance military strategy leaning more towards targeting the North Korean leadership than before?
I don't think so. And we should remember that it is Marshal Kim Jong-un. He is the marshal of the North Korean People's Army. He is a legitimate military target should he decide to attack South Korea. So decapitation, assassination, those words really don't apply in wartime. He is the military leader, and he's a legitimate target. And I think that all militaries, are concerned with interdicting and interrupting the command and control. And he's at the head of the command and control, both controlling the military and the nuclear weapons. So he's a legitimate target. I am not, I don't think we should read too much into it. Teak knife is a routine exercise, takes place multiple times throughout the year. And it is the U.S. Air Force Special Operations and the South Korean Special Forces working together in joint combined exercise training that takes place quite often. But I think it is important to show that we have our eye on Kim Jong-un. If he miscalculates, he is a legitimate target. He and all of the military commanders will be at great risk if they miscalculate and attack South Korea.
Ms. Long, during the Trump administration, Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander Qasem Soleimani was taken out by the Trump administration. Biden administration removed al-Qaeda leader al-Zawahiri with attack drone MQ-9 Reapers. just last month, MQ-9 Reapers for the first time did live fire drill in South Korea. What do you think is the lesson takeaway for Kim Jong-un?
Well, I don't want to seem like I'm saying that I know that MQ-9s took out either one of those individuals from the U.S. side, but certainly the MQ-9 Reaper was just recently fired in South Korea. By the way, we have other tools to take out legitimate military targets that one might determine to be or term assassination goals. But the great thing about the Reaper exercise is that it came in conjunction with, I think for the first time, our F-22 also being involved in exercises. We've flown the F-22 in the region and in South Korea, but I think it's the first time that they actually participated with their F-35 South Korean stealth fighter. And that's in conjunction with the MQ-9, which, by the way, is having a sister. There's a South Korean model of something similar to the MQ-9 that I think is scheduled to, in the next year or so, to come online production-wise. So it was a really good opportunity not only to demonstrate the capability of that weapon, but in conjunction with the multi-role jet fighters and with a whole-of-force effort that would be directed at a legitimate military target like Kim Jong-un.
And I don't think we can emphasize enough what Ms. Long said about we have multiple capabilities. We look at Reaper drones, we look at the F-22, F-35, but there are long-range missiles, and all of our aircraft really have the capability to reach any target in North Korea. So we shouldn't focus on a single capability, but of course we know that those do make the news.
Yep.
And Ms. Long, as Kim Jong-un is heightening tensions, some say that, including Colonel Maxwell in his recent op-ed, to change Kim Jong-un's calculus that U.S. is always only about rhetorics, that U.S. should actually respond and take punitive and kinetic action against any high-level provocation coming out of North Korea. Do you think such reaction would scare Kim Jong-un, or do you think would escalate unnecessary tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, you know, I've said many times that we still are in this cycle, the United States, for 40 plus years now, of we threaten and then we don't follow through, and then Kim Jong-un or his predecessors escalate, we respond, we give concessions, and we end up right back where we were, a decade or years ago. That has got to change. And what you do want to guard against is being overreactive or rising to an ending cycle of escalation. But you do need to have the theory and the consequence of responding to provocations that are seriously taken more than just verbiage. And that's where we are now.
And I fully agree with that, but I'd just like to clarify. My point about responding to provocation is to prevent future provocations. The South Korea, and I'm talking about not the U.S., but the alliance or primarily South Korea, responding to a kinetic provocation that results in loss of life with a decisive action to prevent further provocation, which means taking out such things as the local command and control, the local firing systems. And I believe that Kim Jong-un does not want provocation, does not want escalation. And the best way to prevent escalation is to show that we are not going to tolerate further provocation. And so that's why it's important, because as Ms. Long said, we have a long history of not responding to such provocations. And Kim Jong-un will continue to push the envelope with provocations if there is no adequate and what I would say a decisive response at the time and place of the provocation.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Ms. Long, Colonel Maxwell, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.